Hello, everyone. This is Casey Towns coming to you from the place where underdogs are always expected to win, CaseyTowns.com. Here's what I heard yesterday from the folks who watched the Panel for Purpose event. It says stuff like, Casey, man, watching the event a week later, it just seemed so different. There were a few things I didn't hear the first time that they listened, the first time that they watched live. I heard that a few times. One word response from me was great. That was my response. You see, sometimes when you're a part of an event, the excitement of the moment, the anticipation of the moment dictates how you hear what's going on, how you view the movements of the people. And once that's over and you go back and you watch that movie, that event the second time, you notice all of the little idiosyncrasies that took place the first time that you were there. But now the third eye and that good ear, they're watching and they're listening. And that's what happened to many of the folks who watched the recap. I'm glad. I'm really glad. I'm glad that you joined us to watch part 2 of the recap as we continue to push forward. That's our mission, to push forward for social change in a positive direction. I want you to listen to the words. Let your third eye and your great ear, let them dictate the meaning of these incredible speakers. I look forward to hearing from so many of you tomorrow about what that third eye and that good ear, what they saw, what they interpreted around the topics that we're going to share with you today. Stay COVID safe and all my best. What do you think is the biggest challenge, and this is for all of our panelists, what do you think is the biggest challenge to accomplishing some of the goals of today's active movement for change in America? Anyone can go. We like to keep our answers to about three minutes.
I think understanding that although we may be unique in groups across the board, knowing that we're all fighting the same fight, and the message, and not to let the message get diluted, because sometimes people kind of get off track and they're like, this is what we want. And it's crazy because we have all this technology at our disposal, and sometimes we want the world all at once when it should be more organized. And it's okay to not just keep throwing things at the movement until something sticks. And when technology comes into play, that we should be better organized. I think that's our challenge right now.
Okay. And, you know, I have to say this, Mayor Sade Jones from Braddock, Pennsylvania is the one who just spoke, folks. And she set some records. She was the youngest mayor in her town. Matter of fact, she unseated someone that was there for, I think, 10 years. And she talked about her challenge was some of those same things, you know, the status quo. She had to get across that status quo, the way things were done. So, Mayor, you know, I know you'll have plenty to say in a little bit. I definitely appreciate you kicking it off and putting that input into the question. Anyone else? Okay. The biggest challenge to accomplishing some of the goals of today's active movement.
I would like to chime in. I saw some folks unmute, so I figured they had something to say. Well, I will say that probably staying on message. I believe Sade alluded to that. Understanding what it is that we want. What is it? Why are you protesting? Why exactly are you compelled to hit the streets? I understand that many people, let's talk about the psychology of some of this. Many people have been locked in the house for the past few weeks due to the coronavirus. So some people wanted to get out because it looked like the thing to do, while there were some people looking to get out because it was time to demand justice. And there were some people getting out because they wanted to be a part of the number. Now, and then some people wanted to get out to disrupt and distract. So you got to understand why you're out there, because when you are out in the streets, these streets are real. All right. I want to tell all my young protesters that these streets are real and the police are real, meaning that they can detain you, they can attack you, they can shoot at you. So you've got to be prepared. We've got to be prepared when we get out into the streets for anything to happen. So we've got to have a clear mind. We've got to be focused. We've got to have some level of a protocol, and we've got to have a level of understanding of an organization to trust one another. If you're out in the streets and you can't trust the people that you're organizing with or walking with, you shouldn't be walking with them, because we've seen over and over again that they're disruptors, distractors, and detractors out in some of these movements. And so I just want everybody to understand that you've got to be clear on why you're in the streets and who you're in the streets with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brother KC, just
yes.
a footnote to add to the great comment of my brother Roy and my sister. I think it's an imperative that whoever is protesting does not see protesting as the finish line. It is not the end, it is only the beginning. There are two areas that protest must lead to in order for protest to be considered a success. If all people do is protest, then you have a organized outdoor venting session that allows people to yell and get off their chest the way they feel, but nothing changes. So protest in one side has to lead to policy change. But even bigger than policy change, protest has to lead to a power change in the communities that we live in. We right now, Brother KC, we in the Black neighborhoods, and have you noticed we don't even call it neighborhood no more, we just call it the hood. I said, why do we call it just the hood, not neighborhood? It's because the concept and function of neighbor is missing. Another subject for another time. But whenever you come into our environment where we share space and time with one another, we have a colony, not a community. And there's a difference between a colony and a community. A community is when people live in the area they do business in, and they invest the profit from their business in the area they live in to increase the property value, and they have a vested interest in the environment where they share space and time with one another. But we live in a colony. In almost every major city you go in where Black people live, you got an Italian pizza joint, you got a Korean beauty supply house, a Vietnamese nail shop, you got a Jewish-owned pawn shop, a white man-owned payday loan spot, an Indian-owned chicken fry this, fry that on the side of a gas station. But none of them live in the neighborhood they're doing business, and none of them invest any resources to make that better. So protest has to lead to policy change, which means that we hold government accountable to giving justice. But bigger than that, protest has to lead to power change, where we began to engage in economic enterprise in the area we live in and reinvest our profit in that environment where we share space and time, so that we can have a community instead of a colony.
I'm glad you brought that up, because very good point. There are differentiating reasons why people protest. I know we have a gentleman on from Milwaukee who part of his personal protest was about voting rights, which is part of empowerment. So total different reason to put boots on the street and protest. You know, so there's a lot of different reasons why people do what they do. It's a very good point. And Roy Taylor.
In the 1960s, people marched because
Joe Watkins.
In the 1960s, people marched because they wanted to see legislative remedy to some of the nation's ills, especially as it related to people of color like me and many of us on this Zoom call. And I marched in the 70s with SCLC when I lived in Alabama for just that reason, because I didn't do it because it was safe to do, because clearly it wasn't. There was risk involved. But I did it because I wanted to see some legislative remedy for the ills that impact people of color then and even now. And so I said this on CNBC some weeks ago, and I stand by it, which is that hopefully the end of this, especially for young people who have lots of energy and who are so passionate to see our country change for the better, one of the ways to do that is to make sure that we get the legislative remedy that we need. which is some kind of national police reform legislation, especially as it relates to the use of excessive force. If you have national legislation that mandates what police officers may or may not do, especially with regards to excessive force, then we will have accomplished something concrete. And if you have the enforcement measurements in that legislation that reward and punish the different police units that choose to obey or disobey the legislative remedy in place, then you've got some teeth to it, and you can see the effect of some positive change. But at the end of all this, you need the legislative remedy. You need to make sure that those elected officials on the state, federal, and even the ones on the local level initiate the kind of remedy so that we don't see another George Floyd happen. What Sandra Bland, what happened to Sandra Bland in Texas. We don't see that happen to any person of color, male or female, in this country. So legislative remedy is the most important thing to see happen from this. And it's great to see, and I agree, communities need to change as well. But at the end of it, if the protest can lead to legislative change to fix the problem so that it doesn't happen anymore, so that we don't have to march next year because another person of color was killed, then we've achieved our purpose by way of proper legislative remedy.
We are all so connected right now, and I'll tell you why. We're only one question deep. Number one, Rob, Ricky, you guys have boots on the ground at ground zero, okay? Which was the epicenter for this new movement. So we're talking about the impact of folks that are marching on the ground and doing things in your hometown with you. I talked about the millennials. I talked about Generation Z and Y. I just have a quick question for you because that's what kicked this all off, you know. And then we talked about Mr. Watkins mentioned Sandra Bland, which goes back to David Allen, and I'm sure he will talk a little bit about that. But I want to know from you, are most of the folks out there marching with you and out there creating change at ground zero, are they mostly millennials and Gen Z, Gen Y folks?